To events in Spain, the deaths and injuries caused by terrorists in Barcelona and Cabril. Let's speak now to Zahed Amanullah. He's head of networks at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a London-based think tank, and joins us from Bradford. Zahed, thank you very much for being with us. It may well be some time before we know whether or not these people were directed by Islamic State or merely inspired by them, but one thing we do know for certain is that IS have been telling people to carry out precisely this type of attack.
Absolutely. I mean, only days ago, ISIS put out a video by an Australian jihadi in English, explicitly calling for this type of attack. They've done the same thing in other languages, in Spanish as well. So it's very clear that this is something that they want to have people adopt as a strategy. We've seen it, obviously, this year alone in the UK and elsewhere, and even in Charlottesville last week, the same type of tactic to cause mayhem and death and destruction. So it's no surprise that they've actually taken credit for it, even though there may not be any explicit coordination done between them and the perpetrators.
Still, for an attack such as this to take place, you need two things. You need that strategy, but you also need people willing to carry it out. I mean, what are the conditions that engender the idea in someone's head that this sort of behaviour is not just justifiable, but justifiable to your God?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, there's so many factors that are in place to make someone vulnerable to this type of activity, and we've seen it, you know, in the people who have fled to Syria, for example, often from middle-class families, you know, not necessarily fitting the same profile that we would seen in the past, you know. So it depends on the situation, but it's rooted in identity often, and you know, as we learn more about the people who perpetrated these attacks, we'll get some clues as to what caused them to be vulnerable. But the key thing also is, how do we keep them from being influenced by these type of messaging and these types of exhortations to take out these types of attacks? That's something we have to put a lot more emphasis on, because, as you know, when someone uses a vehicle to kill people, they go from in seconds from being an innocent bystander to a terrorist, you know, and that's a very short time frame to sort of intervene. We need to get in the heads of people who are willing to do this.
Zahed, just very briefly, if you can, how do we intervene in that radicalisation process? Up until this point, it doesn't seem we've been particularly effective at doing so.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. I mean, social media companies, for example, have been focusing a lot on taking down content, but there's so much content out there, and it's so difficult to identify what is extremist material, what isn't. Often, you know, it's the nuances are very subtle. So what we do need to do is build a capacity of civil society to actually produce messaging that will reach the kind of people that we see who are vulnerable to this type of recruitment. And that means understanding.
Zahed, I'm so sorry. We have to cut short this interview. We're just out of time. Zahed Amanullah, thank you very much for being with us.